The Count pretended to be a servant to watch his bride. But what she said changed everything. Michael Anderson Parker looked out the window of the lawyer's office while listening to the terms of the marriage agreement that would unite his family with the Thompsons. His mind was elsewhere, questioning for the 1,000th time whether this arranged marriage was really necessary. At 28, he had never met the woman he would marry in 3 weeks. It was then that he heard her name for the first time that afternoon. Emma Thompson, the eldest daughter of a traditional family from upstate New York who had lost almost everything but maintained the name and lands of the old estate. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Thompson has accepted all the terms," said the lawyer. "The wedding will take place in the chapel of Oakwood Estate, according to their family tradition." Michael simply nodded. His mother had arranged everything. He needed to get married to receive his grandfather's inheritance, and the Thompson family needed the money to save the property that had belonged to them for 4 generations. A perfect agreement on paper. But something didn't let Michael rest. He didn't trust anyone easily. His childhood among people interested only in his fortune had made him cautious, suspicious. How could he marry a complete stranger without even knowing who she really was? That's when the idea came to his mind. An absurd, risky idea, but one that made total sense for someone like him. Michael wanted to see Emma Thompson when she didn't know who he was. He wanted to observe her in her natural environment, without masks or pretense. 3 days later, Michael was driving his simple pickup truck down the dirt road that led to Oakwood Estate. He had left behind the expensive suits, the luxury watch, the imported car. He wore faded jeans, a simple shirt, and worn-out boots. His hair, usually well-groomed, was deliberately messy. He wore an old cap and had let his beard grow. The property that appeared before him was impressive, even in its questionable state of preservation. The main house was a 19th-century construction, with white walls and tall windows. Around it, gardens that were once grand showed signs of neglect. But there was something charming about that elegant decay. Michael parked near the back of the property, where he had seen a discreet notice posted on the staff gate. They were looking for someone to help with the wedding preparations. "General helper," said the yellowed paper. He smiled. Perfect. A woman of about 60 greeted him at the kitchen door. Her grey hair was tied in a bun, and she looked him up and down with experienced eyes. "Are you here for the position?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Yes, ma'am," replied Michael, careful not to let his accent give him away. He had rehearsed simpler speech, closer to common folk. "My name is Michael Smith. I saw the notice on the gate." "Mrs. Margaret," she introduced herself. "I'm the housekeeper here. We need someone strong to help with moving furniture, setting up tents, those kinds of things. The young lady's wedding is in 3 weeks and everything is behind schedule. I can start right now if you need me to." Mrs. Margaret studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Do you have references?" Michael had prepared a story. He said he had worked on other rural estates, helping with general services. He showed fake documents he had obtained through discreet contacts. They weren't illegal, just contained basic information under a common name. "All right," said Mrs. Margaret finally. "You can stay in the back room, along with Johnny, the caretaker. Payment is per day worked. Start tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Michael thanked her and followed Mrs. Margaret to a small, simple room at the back of the property. It was Spartan, just a narrow bed, an old wardrobe and a chair. The window overlooked the side gardens. It was perfect for his purposes. That night, lying on the uncomfortable bed, Michael wondered if he wasn't making a terrible mistake. But curiosity was stronger. He needed to know who Emma Thompson was before tying his life to hers. The next day began before sunrise. Johnny, a middle-aged man with sun-tanned skin, woke him up with knocks on the door. "Let's go, boy. Mrs. Margaret doesn't like lazy people." Michael dressed quickly and followed Johnny to the kitchen, where a simple breakfast was served. Bread with butter, strong black coffee, seasonal fruits. He ate in silence, listening to Johnny talk about the farm's routine. "The girl Emma is good people," said Johnny, biting into a slice of bread. "She's not like those rich city girls, all fussy. Here she gets her hands dirty when needed." Michael wanted to ask questions, but he restrained himself. He couldn't seem too interested. Mrs. Margaret entered the kitchen carrying a huge list. "Michael, you'll start by helping to clean the main hall. Then you have to check the chairs in the storage room, see how many are in good condition. In the afternoon, if there's time, start trimming the hedges at the entrance." He nodded and followed the instructions. Physical work was something Michael hadn't done in years, and he felt his muscles protest as he moved heavy furniture and swept the huge hall. But there was something liberating about it. No one there knew who he really was. No one wanted anything from him except honest work. It was around 10 in the morning that he saw her for the first time. Emma Thompson came down the main staircase of the mansion with a tray in her hands. She wore a simple light-colored dress, her red hair tied in a loose ponytail. She wore no makeup and there was a paint stain on her left cheek. She seemed to be in her early 20s, perhaps 24 or 25. Michael kept sweeping, watching her discreetly. Emma entered the kitchen and he heard her voice for the first time. It was soft, gentle. "Mrs. Margaret, you need to eat something. I know you're worried about the preparations, but it's no use getting sick." "Miss, I'm too old to be pampered," replied the housekeeper, but there was affection in her voice. "None of that old talk. You're the strongest person I know." Michael pretended to be focused on his work when Emma left the kitchen, but she noticed him. "Good morning," she said, stopping near him. "You're new here, aren't you?" He looked up, careful not to seem too interested. "Good morning, miss. I'm Michael. I started this morning." Emma smiled, and Michael noticed it was a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome to Oakwood Estate. I hope Mrs. Margaret isn't being too hard on you. She barks, but she doesn't bite." "I'm fine, miss, thank you." She nodded and headed toward the gardens, the now empty tray swinging in her hand. Michael watched her leave, noticing how she greeted every person she met along the way. The old gardener received a warm smile. The girl washing clothes in the back tank got a few kind words. It wasn't an act. Michael knew social theatre well. He knew when someone was being polite out of obligation, but Emma seemed genuinely interested in the people around her. During lunch, served in the kitchen for the employees, Michael learned more about the Thompson family. Emma's mother, Mrs. Victoria, was a strict woman who rarely left her quarters. Her father had left years ago, under circumstances no one openly discussed. Emma was an only child and carried the burden of keeping the property running alone. "She sells some things she makes," Johnny commented quietly. "Embroidery, I think. Don't tell anyone about this, but I've seen her secretly packing orders in her father's office." Michael absorbed this information silently. So Emma was trying to help financially, but keeping it a secret, probably due to family pride, or perhaps because her mother wouldn't approve. That afternoon, while working on the hedges, Michael saw Emma in the side garden. She was sitting on an old stone bench with a small basket beside her. He pretended to be focused on trimming, but watched her every move. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Emma took an embroidery hoop from the basket and began working. Her fingers moved with practice, the needle dancing across the fabric. She seemed lost in thought, and Michael noticed a worried expression on her face. That's when another woman joined her in the garden. She was younger, perhaps 18 or 19, blonde with her hair tied in an elegant bun. She wore a more elaborate dress than Emma's. "Cousin, are you still stuck on this embroidery habit?" said the blonde girl, in a tone that tried to sound playful but carried criticism. "When you marry, you won't need to do this anymore. Your husband is rich enough to buy 1,000 ready-made dresses." Emma kept embroidering, but Michael noticed the tension in her shoulders. "I enjoy embroidery, Olivia. It calms me. But it's not fitting for a woman of your position," insisted Olivia, sitting beside her. "People will talk. You need to act like the wife of an important man." "I don't even know this man," replied Emma, her voice softer now. "I don't know what he's like, what he enjoys, whether he'll accept me as I am." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. She was afraid. Afraid of him, of who he might be, of what he'd expect from her. "Oh, Emma, don't be silly," said Olivia, but her voice held a hint of poison. "You got lucky. You could have stayed here growing old alone on this falling-apart estate. At least you'll have comfort, money. What else matters?" It matters whether he'll respect me, Emma answered, her voice firm now. It matters whether we can build something real. I don't want to be just an obligation in someone's life. Olivia laughed, an artificial sound. You've always been too much of a dreamer. Marriage is an arrangement, cousin. It's always been this way in families like ours. The sooner you accept that, the better. Emma didn't respond. She pushed the needle into the fabric harder than necessary, and Michael saw when a drop of blood stained the white embroidery. She had pricked herself. Olivia stood up, smoothing her dress. I'll see if Aunt Victoria needs anything. You should come with me instead of sitting here alone with your thoughts. When Olivia walked away, Emma put her injured finger in her mouth, looking at the ruined embroidery. Michael saw when a tear rolled down her face, quickly wiped away. He wanted to go to her to say something, but he couldn't. Not yet. He was just a temporary employee. Any approach would be inappropriate. But something had shifted inside him. The woman he saw in the garden wasn't the gold-digging socialite he had imagined. She was someone struggling to maintain dignity in a difficult situation, someone forced into a marriage she didn't choose, just like him. In the following days, Michael observed more. He saw how Emma treated everyone on the property with genuine respect. He saw how she helped Mrs. Margaret in the kitchen when the housekeeper was overwhelmed. He saw how she spent hours tending to gardens that no longer had a permanent gardener. He also began noticing other details. Olivia visited the estate frequently, always accompanied by a young man whom Michael discovered was Brandon Thompson, Emma's cousin. Brandon was around 30 years old, handsome in a calculated way, always well-dressed, always with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Johnny didn't like him. That one only shows up when he needs something, the groundskeeper murmured one day while they worked together fixing a fence. Ever since Emma's father passed away, he's been hanging around the property trying to convince Mrs. Victoria to sell everything. And why doesn't she sell? Asked Michael, pretending casual curiosity. Because of Emma. The girl loves this land. This is where she grew up, where the memories of her father are. Mrs. Victoria is tough, but she respects her daughter's wishes. Michael processed this information, so Emma was sacrificing herself, accepting the arranged marriage to save the property she loved. And there was a scheming cousin hanging around, waiting for his chance. It was in the second week that Michael finally had a more direct interaction with Emma. Mrs. Margaret had assigned him to help transport some heavy boxes from the storage shed to the main house. They were old decorations that would be used for the wedding. Emma was organizing everything in a side room that would be turned into a dressing room for the big day. "Michael, can you put that box over there, please?" she said, pointing to a corner. He obeyed, and when he turned to leave, Emma called him. "Wait, please. I need help opening this box. The lid is stuck." Michael approached and used a tool to open the old box. Inside were pieces of an antique tea set, wrapped in paper yellowed with age. "They belonged to my grandmother," Emma said softly, carefully picking up one of the cups. "She used this set at her own wedding. Mom wants me to use it too." Michael noticed the sadness in her voice. "You don't want to use it, miss?" Emma looked at him, surprised that he had asked the question. "I'm sorry, miss," Michael said quickly. "It's none of my business." "No, it's fine," she replied, still holding the delicate cup. "I do want to use it. It's nice to keep traditions. It's just, sometimes I wonder if I'll be able to create my own happy memories, or if I'll just be repeating other people's history." There was a vulnerability in her words that Michael hadn't expected. She wasn't pretending to be strong. She was admitting her fears to a simple employee. "I think everyone creates their own story," Michael said carefully, "even when they use someone else's cups." Emma smiled, and it was a sad but genuine smile. "You're wise for someone so young, Michael." "Thank you." She turned her attention back to the box, and Michael left the room with a racing heart. Every conversation, every moment observing her, only confirmed what he was beginning to feel. Emma Thompson wasn't just pretty or polite. She was special in a way he hadn't expected, and he was starting to worry about what would happen when she found out who he really was. That night, Michael could hardly sleep. Lying in the narrow bed of the staff quarters, he wondered for the 100th time if this plan had been wise. What had started as simple suspicion and a desire to control the situation was turning into something more complicated. He was starting to like Emma, not in the superficial way he had liked other women in his life. There was something deeper there, a genuine respect, a growing admiration. The problem was that she didn't know who he was, and when she found out, she would surely hate him for the lie. The next morning, while working in the garden, Michael heard raised voices coming from the main house. He recognized Emma's voice, tense, and Brandon's louder voice. "You're being stubborn, Emma," Brandon was saying. "This marriage is the only thing that will save this property. You should be grateful instead of causing problems." "I'm not causing trouble," Emma replied, her voice controlled but firm. "I'm just asking to meet the man before I marry him. Is that so unreasonable?" "Yes, it is unreasonable," Brandon said impatiently. "You'll get to know each other after the marriage. That's how it works. Do you think your mother knew your father before they married?" "And look how that ended," Emma responded, and there was pain in her voice now. A heavy silence fell. "That was a low blow, cousin," Brandon finally said, his voice lower but with a threatening tone. "Watch what you say. You need this marriage more than you think. It wouldn't be wise to make the groom back out before even meeting him." "He already wants to back out?" Emma asked, and Michael detected fear in her voice. "Not yet," Brandon replied, "but wealthy men have pride. If they know you're reluctant, they might reconsider. And then what will happen to this estate? To your mother? To me?" "To you?" Emma repeated, and now there was suspicion in her voice. "To the whole family," Brandon quickly corrected. "We're all Thompsons, Emma. We need to stick together." Michael heard footsteps walking away and quickly returned his focus to his work, but his mind was racing. Brandon was manipulating Emma, using her fears against her. And worse, he was making it clear that he too had an interest in the outcome of this marriage. In the afternoon, Mrs. Margaret asked Michael to bring tea to Emma, who was working alone in the office. It was an unusual request. Normally the housekeeper herself would do it, but she was busy receiving deliveries. Michael carefully prepared the tray and headed to the office. The door was slightly ajar, and he knocked lightly. "Come in," Emma said without looking up from the papers in front of her. Michael entered and placed the tray on the side table. "Mrs. Margaret sent the tea, miss." "Thank you, Michael," Emma said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying recently. Michael hesitated. It wasn't his place to ask, but something in his chest urged him to say something. "Are you all right, miss?" Emma seemed surprised by the question. She opened her mouth to give an automatic response, probably to say everything was fine, but then stopped. Something in her face changed, as if she had made a decision. "Can I ask you a question, Michael? And do you promise to be honest?" "Of course, miss." "Do you think it's possible to learn to love someone, even when you didn't choose that person?" The question caught Michael off guard. He knew he should give a simple, neutral answer, but the words came out before he could censor them. "I think love isn't something that happens all at once," he said slowly. "It's built gradually, in small moments, in daily choices to be kind, to try to understand the other person, to truly care." Emma watched him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You speak like someone who has loved before." Michael felt the weight of the question. He had never truly loved anyone. He'd had relationships, but always superficial ones, always with the awareness that the other person was more interested in his money than in him. "I speak as someone who would like to believe it's possible," he answered honestly. Emma was silent for a moment, then picked up the teacup. "Thank you, Michael. You've given me hope on a day when I really needed it." Michael nodded and left the office, but his own words echoed in his mind. He was starting to believe that love could be built, but based on lies. The days passed in a curiously comfortable routine. Michael worked hard during the day, watched Emma whenever possible, and at night stayed in his small room thinking about how this situation could end. He began to notice more details. Emma was indeed selling embroidery in secret. He saw her packaging parcels late at night when she thought everyone was asleep. He also noticed how she hid the money in a box at the back of the office closet, probably to help with the estate's expenses without her mother knowing. There was dignity in that. Emma was doing her best to keep her family and home together, even if it meant marrying a stranger. It was in the third week that everything began to fall apart. Michael was helping set up the tents for the wedding reception when he heard screams coming from the house. He dropped what he was doing and ran to see what was happening, just like other staff members. In the entrance hall, Mrs. Victoria was standing, holding some papers in her hands. She was a tall, slender woman with completely white hair pulled into an impeccable bun. Her eyes, however, were full of fury. "Who are you?" she shouted at Michael, who had stopped at the entrance. "Who are you really?" Michael's heart sank. She had found out. Emma appeared on the stairs, pale. "Mom, what's going on?" "This man," said Mrs. Victoria, pointing at Michael with the papers, "is not who he says he is. I had all new employees checked as a security measure for the wedding. And do you know what I found out? Michael Smith doesn't exist. The documents are fake." Emma looked at Michael, her eyes wide. "But he is," began Brandon, who was also there, his eyes shining with interest. "He is Michael Anderson Parker," said Mrs. Victoria, her voice cutting. "The groom, the man who is supposed to marry my daughter in a week." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma slowly descended the last steps of the stairs, her face showing a succession of emotions. Shock, confusion, and then anger. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael wanted to lie, deny it, but he had already lied too much. "It's true," he said simply. "How could you?" whispered Emma, and there was so much pain in her voice that Michael felt it like a punch. "How could you do this?" "I needed to know you," began Michael, but Mrs. Victoria interrupted him. "You humiliated us," she shouted. "You infiltrated our home, deceived us, made fools of us. What kind of man does that?" "A man who trusts no one," replied Michael, meeting Emma's eyes. "A man who has been deceived so many times that he thought he was being smart. But I was wrong, completely wrong." "Get out," said Mrs. Victoria. "Get off my property now, and you can forget about the wedding. I won't allow my daughter to marry someone capable of such dishonesty." "Mom, no," said Emma, but her voice was weak. "Are you defending him?" asked Mrs. Victoria, incredulous. "No, Emma shook her head, looking lost. "I just need to understand." "There's nothing to understand," intervened Brandon, putting his hand on Emma's shoulder. "The man is a liar. Mrs. Victoria is right. The wedding needs to be cancelled." Michael saw the poorly disguised satisfaction on Brandon's face and understood. The cousin had been waiting for this. Maybe he was even the one who suggested checking the employees' backgrounds. "Emma," said Michael, stepping forward. Several staff members moved to block him, as if he were a threat. "Please, let me explain." "No," she said, raising her hand. Tears were streaming down her face now. "Not now. I can't. I need time." "Emma, I'm sorry," said Michael desperately. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but what I saw, what I learned about you, all of that was real." "It was real?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You were watching me like I was an animal in a zoo, testing to see if I was good enough for you. How dare you say any of that was real?" She was right. Michael knew it. There was no excuse for what he had done. "You have 1 hour to leave the property," said Mrs. Victoria coldly. "If you don't leave, I'll call the authorities." Michael nodded. He looked at Emma one more time, memorizing her face, wishing he could turn back time and make different choices. "I'm sorry," he said again, then turned and left. In the back room, Michael gathered his few belongings. Johnny appeared at the door, his face showing conflict. "So you really are the fiancé, huh?" "Was," corrected Michael bitterly. "Why did you do it, man? Anyone could see the girl is a good person. You didn't need to pretend." "I know that now," said Michael, closing his backpack. "But I didn't know before." "And what are you going to do now?" "I don't know," admitted Michael. "Honestly, I don't know." He left the estate under the curious and judgmental stares of all the employees. As he passed by the side garden, he saw Emma's embroidery basket still on the stone bench, abandoned. He felt like taking something, anything of hers, but knew he didn't have that right. Michael drove back to New York City in a state of shock. How had he messed everything up so completely? His attempt to be careful, to protect himself, had destroyed the only real thing he had found in years. In the following days, Michael tried to get in touch with Emma. He called the estate, but Mrs. Margaret, with a sad voice, said that Emma didn't want to talk to him. He tried sending messages, but they were all blocked. He wrote letters, long letters, explaining his thoughts, his fears, how she had changed his view on marriage and commitment. He told everything in the letters, how he had grown up distrustful, how he had been deceived by people only interested in his money, how the arranged marriage seemed like a cold transaction until he saw her, how every day working at the estate had revealed an amazing woman, kind, strong, dedicated. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Michael sent the letters through a private courier, making sure they would arrive. What he didn't know is that Brandon was intercepting all correspondence that arrived at the estate, and Olivia, his secret ally, was making sure Emma didn't receive any messages. At Oakwood Estate, Emma was devastated. She had spent 3 weeks living with Michael without knowing who he was. She had trusted him, opened her heart to him, and it was all a farce. But there was something that bothered her even more. Deep down, very deep, a part of her understood. She herself had thought several times how horrible it would be to marry someone who saw her only as a means to an end. Michael had made a wrong choice trying to protect himself, but that didn't make the lie any less painful. Mrs. Victoria was in damage control mode. The marriage had been publicly cancelled, causing a huge scandal in social circles. The estate's debts kept growing, and there was no longer the promise of financial salvation through marriage. That's when Brandon made his move. "Aunt Victoria," he said a few days after the scandal, sitting in the living room, "I have a proposal." "I'm not interested in any proposals at the moment, Brandon," she replied tiredly. "But you should be," he insisted. "I found another suitor for Emma, a respectable man, an agribusiness entrepreneur. Not as rich as Parker, but well off, and more importantly, he's willing to marry quickly before the scandal spreads even further." Emma, who was listening from the door, entered the room. "You've already found another suitor?" she asked, incredulous. "How long did it take, Brandon? 1 day?" 3 days, actually," he replied with a smile. "I'm efficient when I need to be. I won't marry a stranger just because you say I should," said Emma firmly. "You have no choice," said Mrs. Victoria, and there was defeat in her voice. "The bank has already sent warnings. Either we sell the estate or you get married. Those are the only options we have." "Then let's sell," said Emma. "Never!" exploded Mrs. Victoria. "This property has been in the family for 4 generations. I won't be the one to lose it." "So you'd rather sell me?" asked Emma, tears in her eyes. The silence that followed was painful. "It's not like that," said Mrs. Victoria finally, her voice softer. "It's not selling. It's securing your future, our future." "It's the same thing, Mother," said Emma, "and you know it." She left the room before they could continue the discussion. In her bedroom, Emma threw herself on the bed and cried. She cried for the impossible situation she found herself in. She cried for Michael's betrayal. She cried for her mother's pressure. She cried for the future she saw crumbling before her. But as she cried, a part of her still remembered the moments with Michael. The conversation about her grandmother's teacups, his words about love being built gradually, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Had it all been a lie? Or was there something real amidst the charade? She shook her head. It didn't matter. He had lied from the very beginning. There was no going back from that. The next morning, Brandon brought the new suitor to meet the family. His name was Richard William Castle. He was 42 years old, a widower with no children. He was polite, well-dressed, soft-spoken, and Emma hated him at first sight. Not because he was a bad person, but because he looked at her as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering buying. There was appraisal in his eyes, but no genuine interest. "Miss Emma," said Richard William, kissing her hand, "it's a pleasure to meet you. Brandon has told me much about you." "I'm sure he has," replied Emma with icy courtesy. Lunch was tense. Richard William talked about his properties, his businesses, his expectations for a wife. Emma barely touched her food, answering only when directly questioned. After lunch, Mrs. Victoria insisted that Emma show the property to Richard William. Brandon accompanied them, clearly ensuring everything went according to his plan. "The estate has a lot of potential," Richard William was saying as they walked. "With the right investments, it could become profitable again. Of course, that would mean some changes. Modernization. Perhaps selling some of the less productive land." Emma stopped walking. "Sell the land. Only the parts that aren't profitable," explained Richard William. "It's just smart business." "This estate isn't a business," said Emma, her voice quiet but firm. "It's my home. It's my family's legacy." "It will be our home," corrected Richard William with a smile. "And our legacy. You need to learn to think about the future, not the past." Emma looked at Brandon, who averted his eyes. She understood in that moment. Brandon wasn't trying to help her. He was trying to take control of the estate through a marriage he could influence. "I need to go," said Emma abruptly. "I have a terrible headache." She didn't wait for an answer, simply turned and hurried back to the house. In her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be her reality. There was a soft knock on the door. "Emma," it was Mrs. Margaret's voice. "May I come in?" Emma opened the door, and the housekeeper entered with a tray of tea and cookies. "I thought you might need this," she said kindly. Emma threw herself into the older woman's arms and cried. Mrs. Margaret held her as she had since Emma was a child. "I know, my girl," she murmured. "I know it's hard." "I don't know what to do, Margaret," sobbed Emma. "I can't marry that man, but I also can't let Mom lose the estate." Mrs. Margaret gently pushed her away and looked into her eyes. "You can do anything you decide to do," she said firmly. "You're stronger than you think, stronger than your mother, stronger than Brandon, stronger than any of them. But what if I make the wrong decision?" "Then you learn and make another decision," said Margaret with a sad smile. "That's how life works, my dear. There's no perfect decision. There's only the decision you can live with." Emma thought about those words all night. What decision could she live with? Marrying Richard William and watching the estate be dismantled piece by piece, refusing the marriage and seeing her mother lose everything. Was there some third option she wasn't seeing? That's when she remembered the letters. Mrs. Margaret had casually mentioned that some correspondence had arrived, but Brandon said they were bills. Emma hadn't thought about it at the time, but now she wondered. Was Brandon intercepting mail? The next morning, while everyone was asleep, Emma went to Brandon's office. He was using one of the guest rooms, and Emma knew he kept his documents there. She felt terrible invading someone's privacy, but something told her she needed to do this. In the bottom drawer of the closet under business folders, she found it. A stack of envelopes, all addressed to her, all in Michael's handwriting. With trembling hands, Emma grabbed the envelopes and rushed back to her room. She locked the door and began to read. The first letter was long, detailed. Michael explained his childhood, how he had been raised among people interested only in his money, how he had learned from an early age to distrust the intentions of everyone around him, how the arranged marriage had seemed like just another cold transaction where he would be used. He described the day he decided to go undercover, the trip to the estate, the first days working there. And then he began to describe Emma, not her physical appearance, but who she was, her kindness with the staff, her love for the estate, her quiet strength, her vulnerability. "I went undercover to protect myself," Michael wrote, "but what I found was someone who didn't need protection, someone genuinely good, genuinely strong, and I realized the one who needed to change was me." Emma read all the letters, one after another. There were 7 in total. In each one, Michael went deeper. He talked about specific conversations they had had, about moments he had observed that had touched him, about how he had started to imagine a future with her, a real future, not just a paper agreement. In the last letter, Michael admitted he didn't expect forgiveness. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he wrote. "I'm not even asking for a second chance. I'm just asking you to know the truth. You asked me if I thought love could be built. I told you yes, I didn't know it at the time, but I was talking about us. In 3 weeks, you taught me more about true love than I had learned in my entire life. And if I could go back, I would arrive at that estate as myself, ask you to get to know the real me and hope you would give me a chance. But I can't go back. I can only move forward, knowing I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me." Emma finished reading with tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of understanding, of sadness, of lost possibilities. She didn't know what to do with that information. But one thing was clear. Brandon had hidden the letters on purpose. He didn't want her to have the chance to forgive Michael. He wanted control of the situation. There was a knock on the bedroom door. "Emma." It was her mother's voice. "Richard William is here again. He wants to speak with you." Emma quickly wiped her face and hid the letters under the mattress. "I'm coming, Mother." She went downstairs a few minutes later, trying to appear composed. Richard William was in the living room, Brandon at his side. Both had serious expressions. "Miss Emma," said Richard William, standing up, "I need to be direct with you. My marriage proposal has a condition. I need an answer by the end of the week. I have other business to attend to and cannot wait indefinitely." "Other business," Emma repeated dryly. "Is that how you see this? A business deal?" "I see it as a practical arrangement that benefits both parties," Richard William replied without emotion. "You need financial security. I need a wife from a good family. It's as simple as that." "Nothing in life is that simple," said Emma. "So you are refusing?" asked Richard William. Emma opened her mouth to say yes, to send that man away. But then she thought of her mother. She thought of Mrs. Margaret, of Johnny, of all the workers who depended on the estate for their livelihood. "I need more time," she finally said. "You have until Friday," said Richard William. "If I don't have an answer by then, I will consider the proposal refused." He left without another word. Brandon stayed, looking at Emma with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You're making a mistake if you refuse," he said. "This may be your last chance." "Why are you doing this, Brandon?" asked Emma. "Why are you so determined to marry me off to this man?" "Because I care about you," he replied, but his eyes told another story. "No," said Emma, taking a step forward. "That's not it. You're getting something out of this. What is it?" Brandon hesitated, then smiled. It was an unpleasant smile. "Richard William promised me a percentage of the lands he sells," he admitted, "and an administrative position at the estate. Yes, I get something. But you get something too. Everyone wins." "Except the estate," said Emma. "Except the family legacy." "Legacies don't pay the bills," Brandon said coldly. "Grow up, Emma. The world isn't a fairy tale." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Emma watched him leave, feeling disgust growing in her chest. Brandon had always been self-serving, but she never imagined he would stoop this low. She spent the next few days in a fog. She couldn't eat, barely slept. She reread Michael's letters every night, memorizing every word. But she didn't know what to do with them. It was Mrs. Margaret who finally forced her to act. "You need to decide, girl," the housekeeper said on Thursday morning. "Either you go to New York City and talk to that young man, or you forget about him for good. But this in-between is destroying you." "He lied to me, Margaret." "He lied," Margaret agreed. But then he was honest. In the letters, he was completely honest. The question is, can you forgive the lie to give honesty a chance? Emma thought for a long moment. "I don't know if I can trust him again." "Trust can be rebuilt," said Margaret, "but only if both want to rebuild it." Emma made her decision. She would go to New York City. She would confront Michael, tell him everything she was feeling, and then make a decision based on how he reacted. But she needed to go without anyone knowing, especially without Brandon knowing. On Friday morning, Emma told everyone she had a migraine and would stay in her room all day. Mrs. Margaret helped with the charade, bringing meals and medicine to the empty room while Emma slipped out the back door. Johnny was waiting with an old pickup truck. "Are you sure about this, girl?" he asked. "No," Emma admitted, "but I need to do it anyway." The trip to New York City took 3 hours. Emma used the time to rehearse what she would say, but the more she rehearsed, the less confident she felt. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just accept the marriage to Richard William and move on with her life. But then she thought of Michael's words in the letters. and something in her chest tightened. She needed to at least hear him in person. The address in the letters led Emma to an elegant building in an upscale area of New York City. She felt completely out of place in her simple upstate clothes, but forced herself to enter the lobby. "I'm here to see Michael Anderson Parker," she told the doorman. "Is he expecting someone?" the man asked, looking her up and down with evident disapproval. "No, but it's urgent. Personal." The doorman made a call, murmured something, then turned to her. "Mr. Parker is in a meeting. He cannot be interrupted." Emma felt discouragement take over her. Of course, Michael had returned to his life as a businessman, to his important meetings. He had probably forgotten all about the estate. She was about to leave when she heard a familiar voice. "Emma?" She turned and saw Michael stepping out of the elevator. He was wearing a suit, his hair styled, completely different from the man in simple clothes who had worked on the estate. But his eyes were the same, and in them were surprise, hope, and fear. "What are you doing here?" he asked, walking quickly toward her. I read the letters," said Emma, and her voice came out weaker than she intended. "Brandon was hiding them. I only found out a few days ago." Michael's expression changed. Fury crossed his face. "He hid the letters. It doesn't matter," Emma interrupted. "What matters is that I've read them now, and I needed to see you, hear you in person." Michael looked around the lobby, aware of the curious stares. "Come," he said, taking her hand gently. "Let's go somewhere we can talk." He took her to a nearby cafe. It was a quiet place, sparsely frequented at that hour. They sat at a corner table, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "You're different," Emma said finally. "This is the real me," said Michael with a sad smile. "Or at least who I am in this world. But the man who worked on your estate, he was me too. The part of me I didn't know existed." "Why did you do it, Michael?" "Not the excuse from the letters. The real truth." Michael took a deep breath. "Control," he admitted. "I thought, if I could see you without you knowing who I was, I would have control of the situation. I would have the power to decide. But what happened was the opposite. The more I got to know you, the less control I had over the situation, over my feelings." "Do you know what hurt the most?" asked Emma, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "It wasn't the lie. It was thinking that all of it had been pretend. Our conversations, the moments. I thought I had formed a connection with someone, and then I found out it was all a test." "It wasn't a test," Michael said intensely, leaning forward. "Emma, I swear to you, none of it was pretend. Every conversation, every moment was absolutely real, more real than anything in my previous life." "How can I believe you?" asked Emma. "How can I be sure you're not just saying what I want to hear?" "You can't," Michael admitted. "That's the thing. Trust can't be proven with words, it can only be built with time and actions, and I destroyed any trust you might have had in me." Emma fell silent, stirring the coffee she had ordered, but wasn't drinking. "Tell me about your life," she said finally. "Not the version from the letters, the real version. Who is Michael Anderson Parker?" And he told. He talked about growing up as the sole heir to a fortune, about how friendships always came with ulterior motives, about women who were more interested in his last name than in him, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people but feeling completely alone. He talked about how the arranged marriage had been presented to him as a solution. A woman from a good family who needed financial security, a clean deal without complicated emotional expectations. "But then I saw you," said Michael, "and everything I thought I knew turned to dust. Because you weren't what I expected. You were better, real, genuine." "And now?" asked Emma. "What do you want now?" Michael held her hand on the table. "I want to really get to know you," he said. "I want you to really know me. Not as an employee, not as an arranged fiancé, just as Michael. And then if you decide you want nothing to do with me, I'll accept it. But please give me a chance to do this right." Emma looked at their intertwined hands. Part of her wanted to pull her hand away, protect her heart. But another part, the part that had read those letters dozens of times, wanted to give it a chance. "I have to go back," she said. "Richard William wants an answer today. And if I don't give it, my mother will lose the estate." "Who is Richard William?" asked Michael, confused. Emma explained about the new suitor, about Brandon's plans, about the pressure her mother was putting on her. Michael turned pale. "You can't marry him," he said. "You think I don't know that," replied Emma with a humorless laugh, "but I also can't let my mother lose everything." "Marry me," said Michael abruptly. Emma blinked, shocked. "What?" "Marry me," repeated Michael, "not because of the estate, not out of obligation, but because we want to try, because you felt the same connection I felt, because despite everything, there's something real between us." "Michael, I don't even really know you." "Then get to know me," he said. "Spend a few days here, get to know my life, my world. Then we'll go back to the estate and you show me your world for real this time. And then we decide." "I don't have a few days," said Emma, frustrated. "I need to answer today." "Then say yes," said Michael. "Yes to giving me a chance, yes to us trying. I'll go to the estate right now, talk to your mother, to Brandon, to whoever is necessary." Emma wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to believe this could work. But the fear was strong. "And if it doesn't work," she whispered. "Then we try something else," said Michael with a small smile. "But at least we try." Emma closed her eyes, thinking about everything. About the letters, about the conversations they had when he was just Michael Smith, about his kindness, his vulnerability. She also thought about the lie, the pain of betrayal, the fear of being hurt again. But then she thought about Richard William, about a life without choice, about becoming just a transaction. She opened her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." The smile that lit up Michael's face was genuine, full of relief and hope. "Really?" "But with conditions," Emma added quickly. "No lies. None, ever again. If this is going to work, it has to be based on complete honesty." "Complete honesty," agreed Michael. "I promise. And you'll have to win back my mother's and Mrs. Margaret's trust. Especially Mrs. Margaret's. If she doesn't forgive you, I won't either." "Fair," said Michael. "What else?" Emma thought for a moment. "You'll have to work with me at the estate. For real, not pretending. I want you to truly understand what that place means, the work it takes to maintain it. If we're going to be partners, it has to be in everything." "I would love that," said Michael sincerely. "Those 3 weeks were liberating, working with my hands, seeing tangible results from the effort." "I like that." They stayed at the cafe for another hour, talking. This time with no pretenses, no false roles, just two young adults trying to get to know each other. Michael talked about his business, about how managing a multinational company was both rewarding and suffocating. Emma talked about her embroidery, about how each piece carried a part of her soul, about how the extra income helped, but would never be enough to save the estate on its own. When they finally stood up to leave, Michael held her hand again. "I'll do this right this time," he promised. "No matter what happens, I'll do it right." They drove back together to Oakwood Estate. The 3-hour trip was filled with more conversation, with childhood stories, with shared dreams and fears. With every mile, Emma felt the tension in her chest loosen a little more. When they arrived at the estate, the sun was setting. Brandon was on the porch, clearly waiting impatiently for Emma. His face went from irritation to shock when he saw Michael getting out of the car with her. "What is he doing here?" demanded Brandon. "I came to speak with Mrs. Victoria," said Michael calmly. "And with you too, apparently." "You're not welcome here," said Brandon, coming down the porch steps. "This isn't your home," replied Emma coldly. "Not yet, at least, and it won't be." Mrs. Victoria appeared at the door, with Richard William right behind her. "What's going on here?" she asked. "Mum, I need to talk to you," said Emma, climbing the steps. "With all of you." In the living room, Emma asked everyone to sit down. Brandon was visibly furious. Richard William looked bored. Mrs. Victoria was confused, and Michael was nervous but determined. "Mom," Emma began, "I'm not going to marry Richard William." "Emma," started Mrs. Victoria, but Emma raised her hand. "Please, let me finish. I'm not going to marry him because it wouldn't be fair to me or to him. It would be a sacrifice that would lead to nothing but bitterness for everyone involved." "So you're going to let the estate be lost?" asked Brandon sarcastically. "Very noble of you." "No," said Emma, turning to him. "I'm going to marry Michael Parker. The original marriage, the arrangement you yourself helped make. Or have you forgotten?" There was a stunned silence. "After everything he did?" asked Mrs. Victoria incredulously. "Because of everything he did," corrected Emma. "Because he cared enough to want to get to know me first. Because he was honest in his letters. Because he's willing to do the work to build something real with me." "I won't allow this," said Mrs. Victoria firmly. "Then sell the estate," said Emma, and her voice was calm now. "If I can't choose who I marry, then I won't marry anyone. And without marriage there's no money, so sell it. I'll find somewhere else to live." It was a bluff, and Emma knew it. She loved that estate more than anything, but she also knew that her mother loved it even more, and that Mrs. Victoria would never sell if there was any other option. Mrs. Victoria looked at her daughter for a long moment, seeing something there she had never seen before. Determination, strength, choice. "And you?" she asked finally, turning to Michael. "What do you have to say?" Michael stood up, facing the family matriarch. "Mrs. Victoria, I made a terrible mistake. But it was a mistake coming from a place of fear, not malice. I didn't know Emma when I accepted the arranged marriage, and when my mother suggested the arrangement, all I saw was a soulless transaction. I thought I was being clever by sneaking in to observe, but what I did was dishonest and hurtful, and I'm sorry." "Apologies don't fix broken trust," said Mrs. Victoria. "No, they don't," agreed Michael. "But consistent actions over time can, and I'm asking for the opportunity to try. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Richard Williams stood up, clearly irritated. "I won't stand here and be humiliated," he said. "Mrs. Emma, you're making a mistake, but it's your mistake to make." He left without another word, and no one tried to stop him. Brandon remained seated, his eyes moving from Emma to Michael and back. "This won't work," he said finally. "You may think you know him, Emma, but you don't. He's rich, used to having everything his way. You'll just be another one of his possessions." "Or," said Emma, "perhaps you're projecting, Brandon. Because that's exactly what you wanted me to be. A possession you could manipulate for your own gain." Brandon turned red. "How dare you—" "I found the letters," said Emma calmly. "All of them. And I know you hid them. Just as I know about your deal with Richard William to sell parts of the estate. You don't care about me, Brandon, never did. You only care about what you can gain." Brandon didn't respond. He simply stood up and left the room, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Only Emma, Michael, and Mrs. Victoria remained. "Mother," said Emma softly, "I know you're afraid. I am too. But I also know I can't live my whole life in safety if it means giving up any chance at real happiness." Mrs. Victoria closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, there were tears there. "You're so much like your father," she said, her voice breaking. "He was stubborn too, idealistic, believed in true love above all else." "And you loved him," said Emma gently. "I did," admitted Mrs. Victoria. "And when he left, I swore I'd never let you go through the same pain I did. Then let me make my own choices, Mother, and if I get hurt, I'll have you to help me heal." Mrs. Victoria looked at Michael. "If you hurt my daughter," she said, each word heavy with threat, "there won't be a place in this world where you can hide from me." "Understood," said Michael seriously. "And you'll have to prove your worth," continued Mrs. Victoria. "Not with money or promises, with actions. I want to see you working, contributing, showing you understand what it means to be part of this family." "I accept any condition you set," said Michael. Mrs. Victoria nodded slowly. "Then so be it. But the wedding will be postponed. You'll have time to truly get to know each other before marrying." "How long?" asked Emma. 3 months, said Mrs. Victoria. "If in 3 months you still want to move forward, you'll have my blessing." It was more than Emma had expected. She looked at Michael, who nodded. 3 months, he agreed. The following 3 months were both challenging and wonderful. Michael kept his word. He moved to Oakwood Estate, this time staying not in the staff quarters, but in one of the guest rooms. But he worked like any other employee, waking up early, getting his hands dirty, learning every aspect of managing the property. Emma taught him about the estate's history, about every tree planted by her ancestors, about the traditions that made that place so special. She took him to meet the farm workers from neighboring properties, showed him the community that indirectly depended on the estate for their livelihood. Michael, in turn, brought business knowledge. He helped Emma reorganize the estate's finances, finding ways to make it more efficient without losing its essence. He suggested crop diversification, process modernization, but always respecting tradition and consulting Emma before any changes. He also worked hard to regain everyone's trust, especially Mrs. Margaret, who had felt particularly betrayed by the initial deception. "Why should I trust you again?" she asked when Michael approached her a few days after his return. "Because this time, Ma'am, I'm not asking for blind trust," Michael replied. "I'm asking for the chance to rebuild it, brick by brick, day by day. And if I fail, you have every right to kick me out personally." Mrs. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be watching, boy, and I'm much harder to fool than Mrs. Victoria." "I don't doubt it," Michael said with a small smile. As the weeks passed, Michael proved to be genuine in his intentions. He not only worked alongside the other employees, but also listened to them, learned from them. When Johnny taught an old pruning technique, Michael paid attention and practiced until he got it right. When Mrs. Margaret shared traditional estate recipes, he helped in the kitchen, clumsy but determined. Emma watched all this with a mix of surprise and growing affection. The man she saw now was a blend of the Michael Smith she had met and the Michael Parker he truly was. And that combination was interesting. They spent afternoons talking in the garden, this time without secrets. Michael spoke about the pressure of running a company, how he had delegated most operations to spend this time at the estate. Emma talked about her fears of not being sophisticated enough for his world. "You don't need to be sophisticated," Michael said one of those afternoons. "You just need to be you. That's all I want." But not everything was easy. There were moments of tension, of doubt. One evening, Emma found Michael looking at photos on his phone. They were pictures of fancy parties of beautiful, well-dressed women. "Missing it?" she asked, unable to hide the insecurity in her voice. Michael quickly turned off his phone. "What?" "That life, the parties, the glamorous people." Michael laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "Emma, that life was empty. Do you know how many people in those photos really know me? None. They know my name, my money, but not me. Here, Johnny knows I hate strong coffee. Mrs. Margaret knows I like waking up early to watch the sunrise. You know things about me I didn't even know myself. How could I miss emptiness when I've found substance?" Emma wanted to believe. And most of the time she could. But there were moments when fear whispered in her mind. What if he changed his mind? What if he realized he'd made a mistake? Michael seemed to sense these doubts, and every time they surfaced he doubled his efforts to show his commitment. Not with grand words or exaggerated gestures, but with small, consistent actions. He learned to embroider to better understand Emma's work. It didn't turn out well. His stitches were big and uneven, but he tried. And when Emma laughed at his first attempts, it was a laugh full of affection. "You're terrible at this," she said. "I am," Michael agreed, looking at the crooked fabric. "But now I understand why you love doing it. It's meditative, isn't it?" "Yes," Emma said, covering his hand with hers. "Exactly that." 2 months passed. The estate began to show signs of recovery under the new management. But more importantly, Emma and Michael began to build something real. It was Mrs. Victoria who noticed the change first. "You're happy," she said one morning, watching Emma prepare coffee. "I am," Emma admitted, unable to hide her smile. "He makes you happy." "He does," Emma said. "But it's not just him. It's who I am when I'm with him. He makes me want to be braver, more honest with myself." Mrs. Victoria nodded slowly. "Your father used to make me feel that way," she said, and there was sadness, but also affection in her voice. before things got difficult. "What happened between you two, Mother?" asked Emma gently. It was a question she had never asked directly. Mrs. Victoria fell silent for a long moment. "We loved each other," she finally said, "but love wasn't enough. He wanted to sell the estate, invest in other things. I refused. We fought so much about it that eventually nothing was left but anger. He left. And I stayed, protecting this place with all my strength, but losing my family in the process." "Do you still love him?" "A part of me will always love him," admitted Mrs. Victoria. "But I've learned that love needs more than feelings. It needs communication, commitment, a willingness to work together. Things your father and I didn't have. Michael and I do," said Emma. "We're learning to have them." "I know," said Mrs. Victoria, and there was something like pride in her eyes. "And that's why I'm willing to give my blessing. Not because he has money, not because it saves the estate, but because I see you two building the right foundation." Emma hugged her mother, tears of relief streaming down her face, but there was still a hurdle ahead. Brandon hadn't given up. He showed up at the estate a week before the 3 months were over, bringing papers and a lawyer. "I'm here to contest the sale of the estate," he announced in the living room, where the whole family was gathered. "What sale?" asked a confused Mrs. Victoria. "The sale that will happen when you get married," said Brandon, pointing at Emma and Michael. "According to grandfather's will, the estate cannot be transferred to non-family members without the approval of all direct heirs." "Michael won't be the owner of the estate," said Emma. "We've already settled that. The property stays in my name." "But according to the law, spouses have rights to assets acquired during the marriage," argued Brandon, "and if you divorce, he could claim half." "Then we'll make a prenuptial agreement," said Michael calmly. "Emma, do you agree?" Emma hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because the idea of a prenuptial agreement seemed cold, calculating. "It's protection," Michael explained gently, reading her expression. "Not for me, for you. To ensure that no matter what happens between us, the estate will remain yours." "You would give up any rights to the property?" asked Brandon's lawyer, surprised. "Yes," said Michael without hesitation. "The estate is Emma's heart. I would never take that from her, regardless of what happens between us." Brandon seemed frustrated. "You can make all the agreements you want, but that doesn't change the fact that he's a liar," he said, turning to the family. "He deceived all of us. How can you trust him again?" "Because he has earned that trust back," said Mrs. Margaret, who had quietly entered the room. "Unlike you, Brandon, who only loses more trust with every visit." "You have no say in this, housekeeper," said Brandon disdainfully. "But she has my ear," said Mrs. Victoria coldly, "and my respect. 2 things you have completely lost, Brandon." "Aunt Victoria?" "You tried to manipulate my daughter for your own gain," interrupted Mrs. Victoria. "You hid correspondence, made deals in secret, tried to sell pieces of the family legacy, and now you come here talking about trust? You must be joking." "This estate should be mine too," Brandon finally exploded, revealing his true motivation. "My father was your husband's brother. I have as much right to this place as Emma." "Your father abandoned the family 20 years ago," said Mrs. Victoria. "He chose not to be part of this, and you are making the same choice now. That's not fair." "Life rarely is," said Mrs. Victoria. "Now, if you have nothing more productive to add, I suggest you leave, and don't come back until you can treat us with respect." Brandon left, stomping his feet, his lawyer following with an embarrassed expression. After he left, there was a moment of silence. "He's going to try to sue," said Michael finally. "Let him try," replied Mrs. Victoria. "He has no legal basis. The will is clear. But thank you for offering the prenuptial agreement. It shows you understand what really matters here." The last days of the 3 months passed in a mix of preparations and anxiety. The wedding was rescheduled, this time not as a cold transaction, but as a celebration of something that had been built with effort and honesty. Olivia surprisingly apologized to Emma. "I was jealous," she admitted one afternoon, while helping with the preparations. "You always had this connection with the estate, this purpose. I never knew what I wanted. And when I saw you were being forced into an arranged marriage, I felt less alone in my lack of direction." "You're not alone, Olivia," said Emma gently. "And you don't need a defined purpose. You just need to be honest about who you are. How do you make it seem so easy? It's not easy, admitted Emma. It's scary and hard, and sometimes I wonder if I'm making the right choices, but at least they're my choices. The night before the wedding, Emma had trouble sleeping, not because of doubts about Michael, but from pure anticipation. Her life was about to change completely. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Mrs. Victoria. "May I come in?" "Of course, Mom." Mrs. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed holding a small box. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate pearl necklace. "She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. Now it's yours." Emma picked up the necklace carefully, feeling the weight of tradition. "Thank you, Mum." "Emma," said Mrs. Victoria, her voice unusually soft, "I know I was hard on you, that I pressured you in ways I shouldn't have. I was afraid of losing the estate, but I was also afraid of losing you, and I almost lost you anyway." "You haven't lost me," said Emma, holding her mother's hand. "I'm here." "But almost," insisted Mrs. Victoria, "and it would have been my fault. I wanted so much to protect you from the pain I went through that I almost pushed you into a meaningless life. But you didn't push," said Emma. "In the end, you let me choose. Because you forced me to see," said Mrs. Victoria with a small smile. "You have your father's strength, that quiet but unshakable determination." They stayed silent for a moment. "You're going to be happy," said Mrs. Victoria finally. "Not because fate guaranteed it, but because you chose someone who's willing to work for it. And that's all a mother can ask for." On the morning of the wedding, Emma woke up with the sun rising through the window. She sat in bed looking around the room that had been hers her whole life. In a few hours, she would be a married woman. Her life would never be the same again. But instead of fear, she felt peace. She was making the right choice. Not a perfect choice, because perfect choices didn't exist, but an honest choice, based on real knowledge of who she was and who Michael was. Mrs. Margaret helped her get dressed. The dress was simple but elegant. It had belonged to Emma's grandmother and had been adjusted for her. The pearl necklace completed the outfit. "You look beautiful, dear," said Mrs. Margaret with tears in her eyes. "Don't cry," said Emma, her own eyes moist. "Or I'll cry too, and it'll ruin the makeup." "Let it ruin," said Mrs. Margaret with a wet laugh. "Brides are supposed to cry. It's tradition." The ceremony took place in the estate's old chapel. It was a small but beautiful structure, built by one of Emma's ancestors over a century ago. The family and the estate staff were present. Michael's mother had also come from New York City, an elegant woman who looked at the estate with evident surprise. "So this is where my son disappeared for 3 months," she said to Emma before the ceremony. "I can see why. You're not angry? About the wedding, I mean." "Angry?" Mrs. Parker laughed. "My dear, I was praying for something to take my son away from that superficial life. You were the answer to my prayers, even if not in the way I imagined." The ceremony was simple. No pomp, no hundreds of guests, just the people who truly mattered. When it was time for Michael to enter, Emma felt her heart race. He was wearing a suit, but not an ostentatiously expensive one. His eyes sought hers immediately, and in them she saw everything she needed to know. Love, commitment, and a touch of nervousness that made her smile. When they met at the altar, Michael took her hands. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "So do you," she whispered back. The priest, an old man who had known Emma since she was a child, smiled at them both. "We are gathered here to celebrate the union of Emma Thompson and Michael Anderson Parker," he began. "But before we proceed with the traditional vows, I understand the couple has something to say to each other." Michael nodded. He had rehearsed what he would say, but now, looking at Emma, the prepared words seemed inadequate. So he spoke from the heart. "Emma, when I agreed to this arranged marriage, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I was making a smart, practical choice, but the truth is I was running away, running from vulnerability, from risk, from a real chance at love. And then I met you. And you showed me that real life doesn't happen in safe places. It happens when we take risks, when we open up, when we choose to trust even when it's scary. You taught me how to be brave, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that lesson." There were tears in Emma's eyes now. "Michael, when I found out who you really were, I felt so betrayed. But when I read your letters, I understood something. You were just as afraid as I was. Afraid of being used, of not being seen for who you really are. And deep down, I always saw you. I saw the man who was kind to the staff, who pushed through even in difficult tasks, who really listened when I spoke. That man is who you are, no matter what name you're using. And it's that man I choose, today and always." There weren't any dry eyes in the chapel when they finished speaking. The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed, and when the priest declared them married, Michael pulled Emma into a kiss that was both gentle and intense, full of promise and hope. The reception was in the garden, under the estate's old trees. There was no elegant orchestra, but a local band played music that got everyone dancing. There was no chef-prepared food, but Mrs. Margaret prepared a feast of traditional regional cuisine. It was simple, it was honest, it was perfect. During the party, Michael pulled Emma aside. "I have something for you," he said, taking an envelope from his pocket. Emma opened it and found legal documents. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. You created a foundation?" "In the name of Oakwood Estate," Michael explained. "Part of my company's profits will be directed toward preserving historical rural properties. This estate will be the first beneficiary. You'll never have to worry about losing it again." "Michael, this is too much." "It's not," he interrupted. "It's an investment in what matters, in legacy, in history, in family. Things you taught me to value." Emma hugged him, without the right words to express what she felt. "I have something for you too," she finally said, pulling him into the old office. There she showed him a set of embroideries she had made over the past 3 months. Each piece told a part of their story. The estate, the first time they met, the garden where they talked, the chapel where they had just married. "I thought about making just one," she explained. "But I realized our story doesn't fit in one piece. It's complicated, has layers, has mistakes and fixes, like these embroideries." Michael picked up each piece carefully, studying the intricate details. "They're perfect," he said. "Like you." "I'm not perfect," Emma corrected. "Neither of us is. But maybe we can be imperfect together." They stayed in the office for a few more minutes, just enjoying each other's presence, before returning to the party. The evening continued with dancing, laughter, and celebration. Mrs. Victoria even danced, something no one had seen her do in years. Michael's mother and she talked for hours, discovering common interests. Johnny was drunk with happiness, telling exaggerated stories about how he always knew those two would end up together. When the night finally ended and the guests left, Emma and Michael walked through the estate gardens. The full moon lit their path. "So, Mr. Parker," said Emma, her arm linked with his, "how does it feel to be a married man?" "Mr. Parker was my father," Michael said with a smile. "I'm just Michael. My Michael, if you want." "My Michael," Emma tested. "I like the sound of that." They stopped at the stone bench where Emma used to embroider. Michael pulled her to sit beside him. "You know what I was thinking," he said. "That first time we talked here, when you asked me if love could be built. I gave you a pretty answer, but honestly, I didn't know if I believed it. And now I know I was right," said Michael, turning to look at her. "Love doesn't happen all at once. It's built in every choice, to be honest. In every morning waking up and deciding to try again. In every moment of forgiving and being forgiven. We built this, Emma, and we'll keep building for the rest of our lives." "That's good," said Emma, resting her head on his shoulder. "Because there's nowhere I'd rather be, and no one I'd rather build with." They stayed there for hours, talking about the future, about plans for the estate, about where they would live. They decided to split their time between the estate and New York City, about the family they wanted to build. They talked about fears, too, because honesty meant admitting vulnerabilities. In the months following their marriage, Emma and Michael found their rhythm. It wasn't always easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of frustration. Michael discovered that running a historic estate was much more complicated than it seemed. Emma found that Michael's business world was sometimes suffocating and intimidating, but they worked through every challenge together. When Michael felt overwhelmed by the physical work, Emma reminded him to take breaks. When Emma felt insecure at business social events, Michael stayed by her side, translating corporate jargon and proudly introducing her as his wife and partner. The estate began to thrive. With the foundation providing financial support, Emma could implement projects she had always dreamed of. They opened part of the property for rural tourism, educating visitors about history and conservation. They created an apprenticeship program for young people interested in sustainable agriculture. Michael, in turn, discovered a passion for mentoring. He began visiting local schools, speaking about entrepreneurship and business. He used his influence to bring investment to the region, helping other rural families modernize without losing their roots. A year after the wedding, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news came on a sunny morning while she and Michael were working together in the garden. "Michael," she said, putting the gardening tool aside, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, immediately concerned by the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said with a nervous smile. "More than fine, actually. I'm pregnant." Michael froze for a moment, processing the words. Then a huge smile spread across his face. "Really? We're having a baby?" "We are," confirmed Emma, tears of happiness in her eyes. Michael picked her up in his arms and spun around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her back down, his eyes were also moist. "We're having a baby," he repeated, amazed. "A real family." "We're already a family," Emma gently corrected. "But yes, we're growing." The pregnancy brought new challenges and joys. Mrs. Victoria was over the moon, already planning how she would be a grandmother. Michael's mother, who had become a frequent presence at the estate, was equally excited. Even Johnny built a special swing in the garden for when the baby was born. Emma continued working on the estate during the pregnancy, although Michael became increasingly protective. She found it amusing how he worried about every little thing. "Michael, I'm pregnant, not broken," she said one day when he insisted on carrying a light box for her. "I know," he replied, "but let me be overprotective. It's a first-time dad tradition." "Dad," Emma tested the word. "You're going to be a dad." "Scary, isn't it?" "Terrifying," Emma agreed, "but also wonderful." 8 months later, on a warm summer night, Emma went into labor. Michael, who had read all the books about pregnancy and childbirth, went into complete panic. "It's happening," he said, running in circles. "It's really happening. Where are the bags? I packed bags, 3 of them. Where are they?" "Michael," Emma said calmly, holding his hand, "breathe. The bags are in the car. You put them there yesterday. It's okay." "Right. Yes. Breathing. Bags." He took a deep breath. "Are you okay? Do we need to go?" "Hospital. We need to go to the hospital." Emma smiled through a contraction. "Let's go to the hospital," she agreed. The delivery was long but uncomplicated. Michael stayed by Emma's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face, whispering encouragement. When their son was finally born, his strong cry filling the room, they both cried with relief and joy. "It's a boy," announced the doctor, placing the baby on Emma's chest. Emma looked at the tiny being in her arms, amazed. Michael, standing by the bed, was completely mesmerized. "He's perfect," whispered Michael. "He is," Emma agreed. "Our little miracle." They decided to name the baby William, after Emma's grandfather who had built the estate. William Thompson Parker, a combination of both families, both histories. The first months with William were exhausting and wonderful. Michael proved to be a dedicated father, waking for night feedings, changing diapers, singing off-key lullabies that made Emma laugh. "You're terrible at singing," she said one night, listening to Michael butcher a lullaby. "I am," he agreed, looking at the baby in his arms, "but he doesn't seem to mind." The estate adapted to welcome its new member. Mrs. Victoria was often present, helping and advising. Mrs. Margaret became a second grandmother, spoiling William with homemade food and stories about the estate. When William turned 1, they threw a party in the garden. The same band that played at the wedding returned. The same friends and family gathered. But this time, the celebration was for a new life, a new beginning. Michael gave a speech, holding William in his arms. 2 years ago, he began, I came to this estate with questionable intentions and a closed heart. I thought I knew what I wanted from life. But this woman, he looked at Emma, showed me I knew nothing. She taught me about honesty, about vulnerability, about what it truly means to build something lasting. And now, looking at my son, at my family, at this place that has become my home, I realize how much I would have lost if I hadn't had the courage to take a risk. He paused, emotional. So thank you, Emma, for giving me a chance, for forgiving me, for building this beautiful life with me. And thank you all for accepting us, for supporting us, for being part of this story. There were applause and tears. Emma joined Michael, hugging him and William. 2 surprises and second chances, someone toasted. To love that is built, not just felt, added another. To family, said Mrs. Victoria, her voice strong but emotional. The party continued late into the night, and when everyone had left, Emma and Michael walked through the garden once more, now with William sleeping in Michael's arms. Tired? Asked Emma. Exhausted, admitted Michael, but the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from living fully. Yes, agreed Emma, linking her arm with his. That's exactly it. They stopped at the stone bench, their special spot. The moon was high, illuminating the estate that now belonged not just to one person or family, but to a shared story. You know what I find funny, said Michael. What? If I had come here as myself from the start, maybe we never would have gotten here. Maybe you would have kept your defenses up. Maybe I would have kept mine. Are you saying it's good that you lied? Asked Emma with raised eyebrows, but there was humor in her voice. No, Michael said quickly. Definitely not. Lying was wrong, and I'd pay a high price to go back and do it differently. But maybe everything we went through, including the mistakes, brought us where we needed to be. Emma thought about that. Maybe, she said. Or maybe we would have gotten here anyway, just by a different path. There's no way to know. There isn't, agreed Michael. But I like to think that somehow we were inevitable, that no matter which path we took, they would have crossed. Romantic, said Emma with a smile. Learn from the best, said Michael, kissing the top of her head. They stayed there for a few more minutes, just enjoying the silence, the peace, the love they had built together. William stirred in Michael's arms, making a small sound before settling again. Let's go home, Emma said finally. We are home, replied Michael, but he understood what she meant. As they walked back to the main house, their shadows stretched by the moonlight, they didn't know that many more years were yet to come. Years of joys and challenges, of growth and learning. There would be more children, a girl 2 years later who would be as stubborn as her mother and as idealistic as her father. There would be difficult times, arguments about raising the kids, work stress, family health issues. But there would also be moments of pure joy, of shared laughter, of mutual pride in each other's achievements. Michael would eventually sell most of his company, keeping just enough to ensure financial stability and dedicate his time to social impact projects. Emma would expand the rural tourism program, turning Oakwood Estate into a model for other historic properties. Together, they would create a legacy that went far beyond money or land. But all of that was in the future. At that moment, as they entered the house and placed William in his crib, all that mattered was that they were together, that they had chosen each other, not out of obligation or convenience, but for real, honest love, built brick by brick. Good night, whispered Emma when they finally lay down. Good night, replied Michael, pulling her closer. I love you. I love you too, she said. And as they slept, the estate around them rested too, its old walls holding yet another story of love, forgiveness, and second chances. A story that would be told for generations to come, not as a perfect fairy tale, but as a testament that true love was built through daily choices, honest forgiveness, and the courage to be vulnerable. The moon shone over the gardens, over the chapel where they were married, over the fields where they worked side by side. And somewhere in the night, If anyone were paying attention, they might hear the whisper of the wind through the ancient trees, telling another chapter of the Oakwood estate story. A story that had begun with lies but had blossomed into truth. A story that proved second chances were possible, that forgiveness was powerful, and that true love wasn't found, but built with patience, honesty, and determination. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story of resilience and love? Did Michael do the right thing by giving this second chance? Comment below with your sincere opinion about this story of forgiveness and new beginnings. Your participation is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one. Thank you very much for your company.